Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Jocelyn Castro. The Trump administration has ended deferred action for childhood arrivals, leaving it up to Congress to find a solution for the 800,000 dreamers who came to this country as children without documents. UCLA researchers say more than 75,000 LGBTQ people identify as dreamers and 36,000 are enrolled in DACA. Legal experts and political activists are working hard to help this community.
No KKK, no fascist USA!
We are no longer scared. We want to speak up for those that don't have a voice and specifically come out here and show the school, the community, the whole pretty much country or even state at least that we're here to stay. We're here to make progress in America. We're here to actually speak about issues, not just undocumented issues, but also LGBTQ issues.
We didn't cross the border crossed us.
On Point's Diego Girgado has more on the story.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Today on our show, I'd like to welcome our guests. The first one is Julia Vázquez, who is a professor at Southwestern Law School and is the director of a CSUN student legal clinic. And we have Ronnie Veliz, who is the executive director of Somos Familia Valle and a CSUN student. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Of course.
And for having it on this really important topic.
Yes, it is very important. And my first question for both of you is, why are programs such as DACA so important for the LGBT community? We can start with Ronnie and then.
Sure.
Well, DACA is an important program because it is an LGBTQ issue. There's a lot of the conversation when it comes to migration is about family unity, dad and mom and the kids, and not, keeping families together. However, it is also an LGBTQ plus issue because many people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer are not only LGBTQ but also undocumented and people of color, and not just brown, but also black. So it's very important to us to understand that within the immigrant population, the LGBTQ population is present with papers and also without documentation. And it affects everyone's dreams because it does affect also mixed status families, those who only know the United States as their only country from a very early age, and they're going to school, they're working, and all of a sudden this white supremacist administration comes and tries to get rid of that. So it is not only about xenophobia, and it's not just about white supremacy, but it's also about how homophobia and transphobia exists within the immigration policy conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you just said. And from the perspective of a practicing immigration attorney and a law professor, it's so important to analyze an issue like immigration that has been so polarized and the rhetoric is so damaging right now in the political arena, to really break down the conversations, like Ronnie said. In my client population, there's folks who identify with lots of different self-identifications. Mm-hmm. But the conversations that are being had right now in immigration is really a dichotomy where you have folks being placed into categories, and the categories are externally placed. And with DACA, unfortunately, you have a lot of good immigrant versus unworthy immigrant language. And so with that type of perpetuation, it really erases the complexity of the life of the individual immigrant and the different intersecting identities of our individual immigrants. And so when I'm talking to a client who identifies as LGBTQ, and they're expressing to me, and we're prepping their DACA application in a rush because of this arbitrary announcement that was based in politics rather than policy, the DACA application has nowhere and no ability for them to convey the intense and real fear that exists, that permeates their thoughts and their everyday life. If I were to be removed from the country, what would happen to me? And that's a worry for any immigrant, whatever false category they're put into, but it's particularly a worry for folks who are LGBTQ because of the conditions that they would face in a home country.
When we're talking about ICE and, you know, people are coming to their homes and like taking them away, and when we talk about rights, what are the rights that Dreamers have that can protect themselves and their families?
And so it's really important, again, to break down these myths that unfortunately feel so real because of the oppressive language and the fear-mongering language that's coming from the top, meaning the president.
Yep.
And so immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, have rights and constitutional rights. And I think that many of the conversations that are being had are really kept at the constitutional, heavy, academic, high level. And we need to break it down for the community. Because the one thing that I learned from the first day that we started our community lawyering clinic through our on-campus legal clinic here at CSUN is that there's all different types of manifestation of the fear, right? So some folks are just, I don't want to think about it, I'm okay, I speak English, I can pass, it's not going to happen to me. Yeah. But Ronnie mentioned mixed status families. That doesn't mean that it won't happen to a family member, a loved one, you know, a neighbor. And so what's really important is to know when the implementation level of immigration enforcement, everybody should practice their rights ahead of time, which I'll get to. But practicing ahead of time is so important. And number two, if you don't feel comfortable exerting your rights, the number one right that everyone has is the right to remain silent. And folks should exercise that. So I will be sending to you and your staff really helpful resources that I suggest everybody should have with them in their pocket. A Know Your Rights red card is what we call it in the immigration community, that everybody should have in their wallet. And if they ever encounter an immigration agent, they should ask one question first: am I being detained? And that question, no matter what someone is telling you, should be repeated calmly until you get an answer or a semblance of an answer. Am I being detained? Am I being arrested? If someone is not being detained or arrested, you have a right to walk away. Walk away calmly, and again, it's easier said than done. And then level two would be, if you are being detained, to exercise your right to remain silent. I would, if you're just nervous and you don't know what to do, hand over that red card, which clearly states, I am exercising my right to remain silent, and I would like to speak to an attorney. Yes, we're in a really negative moment in time from the federal immigration level. But the positive thing is that immigration attorneys, activists, and community members have come up to produce materials for the community, and we want to disseminate those.
Yeah, of course.
So stepping back to what to do at home. At home, even with my family, I have, you know, I'm always practicing my organizing and my immigration empowerment techniques, even in my own family. I post up a one-page document that clearly says, if immigration comes to your door knocking, this is what you do. Step 1, step 2, and step 3. And my family's like, oh my gosh, Julia, you're so exagerada, you know. Everybody should have this. And it says, ask for an arrest warrant. Door closed, through the window, through the, you know, locked door, through the screen door. Do you have a warrant? If the answer is no, that door stays closed. You do not have to open the door. If the answer is yes, show me the warrant. And it has to be a signed warrant by a judge. It can't be like a blank warrant. So these are all very technical things. But even having that one-page document taped up next to the door and practicing, simply the act of practicing, do you have a warrant? And knowing no one can enter unless I give permission, and understanding that the techniques in which immigration officers are using now are extremely aggressive, extremely assertive. Hopefully it never happens. hopefully folks just practice and they never have to use it. But the first time that you exercise your rights or practice your rights, as whether you're undocumented or documented, should not be in the scenario where you're face to face in a live situation. And lastly, the third thing is have the conversation. Have the conversation with your loved ones, with your mixed status family members. It's scary, it's emotional, but it's so much more important to be prepared than to regret. You know, más vale prevenir que lamentar, which is the saying in Spanish.
Because it's already happening. It's already happening like in many, many states. I mean, the videos are out there. If people really research them, this is happening. And it is easier said than done. We're acknowledging that. However, people need to practice, just like we practice in case of an earthquake, like we practice in the case of someone needing CPR. These are things that are like life-changing, so people should be in the business of practicing. And also folks who may think, oh well, I got my green card, or I'm a naturalized citizen. Like, people like myself have been stopped by Border Patrol. People like myself that went through this, like what people call the right line, which is really not a right line. You know, like everybody that is a person of color, particularly, including black immigrants, should be in the business of practicing this, because we need to empower ourselves and be prepared.
Yeah. Very good. Yes, I agree.
That was really good that you added that. I wanted to make sure that you're able to speak because I noticed you were nodding. That's great. And when we look at the dangers from other countries and how they treat LGBT people, can we kind of talk about the dangers that they can face if they are deported?
Well, let me start by saying that the reason why many LGBTQ+ people immigrate are very different and a little bit more diverse than the reason why heterosexual people migrate. We don't come necessarily here to be a 4.0 GPA student or to have a job. We don't come here to just be directly like a boss or whatever, right? We come here literally because we're fleeing structural violence. We're fleeing women, gender non-conforming people, femmes, non-binary people. We are fleeing because the governments of our country, in my case Peru was literally killing me as a minor. And I knew it as early as 4 years old, that this country is out in business to kill me, to keep anybody who is different, anybody who does not conform with the gender binary, with gender norms and so on. So people come for those reasons, whether it's airplane and overstay their visas, or whether they actually go through the river and cross the border, right? So I think that that's important. The risks are not only to be deported to a country that doesn't even have marriage equality, and let's keep in mind that marriage equality hasn't stopped the femicidios and the killing of trans and queer people, right? You know, like, ain't nobody got time for marriage when your family is kicking you out of home, and when the government and the schools don't even have bullying policies in Peru and in many other countries that include gender identity or sexual orientation. So breaking it down, it's not just being deported to a country where you're going to be killed and mentally, psychologically, spiritually abused, but it's also the fact that there are centers, corporations making profit from detaining immigrants. And when you are transgender or queer or gender non-conforming person and you go into a jail or a prison like the ones governed by CEO Group and Civic Core Group, formerly known as the Correction Corporation of America, then you go into jails and prisons that not only you're placed in detention with the gender that you don't identify with, but you are more likely to be raped. And you're more likely to be assaulted and harassed, not just by other folks in there, but by the guardians themselves. And if we all know something about sexual assault and rape culture, is that, you know, if it's hard for U.S. citizens to come forward, let alone U.S. citizens of color to come forward, put yourself in the position of transgender and gender non-conforming undocumented people, asylum seekers, DACA recipients and non-DACA recipients that have been raped, that have been assaulted, and not only they're dealing with the fact that they're trans or queer, but also dealing with the fact that, am I really ready? Am I really going to go against the U.S. government or a U.S. citizen? Who is going to believe me? Who is going to protect me? So it's a lot. We don't have to think so far as like being deported to a country that's going to kill us. We are going to, the mass incarceration is happening here with the war on immigrants. It's real.
Exactly. And when we talk about America and being called the land of the free, what does it say about this country that's deporting people that are fleeing persecution and are getting a better life? What does it say about us? I can start with you, Julia. And then.
That's a huge question. I would say that it highlights irony, and there's, the separation of de jure and de facto, where maybe some countries like the US will argue that they have laws on the book that protect, right? But how are those laws implemented? Or how is the country failing to implement those protectionary laws? I think it's shameful. We're again seeing that cycle of scapegoating not only immigrants, but now that we have the language and more of a platform to really understand how not every immigrant experience is equal, and that certain immigrant groups like people of color, like LGBTQ, and then when you combine those, are going to be doubly oppressed by a system of laws that are failing to protect even, the most privileged of that group. And so I think it highlights unfortunate cycles of legal history, stemming back to, so I'll get really legal, of like the Chinese Exclusion Act and quotas, and where we see these cycles of scapegoating immigrants. But I also think it also highlights a positive aspect of our legal system, and that is folks who are willing to fight and folks who are willing to step forward and say, no, these laws and these policies are, number one, in and of itself, creating divisions, creating more oppression. So whether that's lawyers who are showing up to LAX and airports across the country to fight the implementation of the Muslim ban, or organizers and activists who are setting up nonprofits that highlight intersections of identities that are not being addressed by larger nonprofits.
Yeah.
I think I always need to push myself, and I identify as an immigrant rights attorney, to see what is the silver lining and really expose that as a point to organize and to activate communities. And I think that's where attorneys and legislators, organizers, and activists need to find that common ground.
Exactly. And Ronnie, I saw you were nodding. Did you want to add?
Yeah, like I agree with what's being said, in the sense that I also want to be, I think it's important now more than ever to provide a sense of hope. It is important that we continue being woke and learn our history, learn what's happening. The fact that Trump is using Pocahontas as a racial slur is not a joke. That says already a lot about us as America, and as people in America. I think what we need to also remember is that immigration, it's time that we don't treat immigration as just a criminal justice issue. It's a public health issue. People flee countries and risk their lives, their babies, their womanhood, their faith, and everything else that they have. They're risking it all because of extraordinary circumstances of desperation and hopelessness. People are not coming to this country to steal jobs and to exert their will on others. People are, like myself and many others, are coming here because we want to feel human, and we want to contribute not just to a country, but to ourselves, to our whole liberation and healing as human beings. I think that it's a public health issue because it affects the well-being of families. And most importantly, I think it's anybody that out there has said, oh, politics is not my thing. It has to change. We have to change that mentality. If we need to learn what our neighborhood councils are. We need to learn what the difference between city, county, state, federal, because it is frustrating to see what's happening on the federal level with Congress, but there's more than just Congress. There's the Capitol in Sacramento, there's a city hall near you, there is a neighborhood council monthly meeting happening in your hood. So we need to get out there and stop just being laptop activists, because that's not walking off. What's really gonna change things, not just for us, but for others, is getting our asses, get up, go out there, speak up, and be somebody, not just be about it. Be somebody that is really about solidarity, and it's gonna change. Everybody has the capacity to be an activist, regardless of your major, regardless of your background, whether you have papers or not. Everybody has the capacity to be good to the prójimo, to the neighbor. And I think that that's the important thing that we have to say about us as Americans, or about believing in America, that we have that possibility. We're fully capable of transforming our communities, the tone in which the immigration topic is discussed, and also, just feel like we are more connected to each other. Because I feel like sometimes it's easy to feel just disconnected because everybody's busy. But my liberation is connected to your liberation. What happens to LGBTQ people who are white, that system oppressing white LGBTQs is the same system that's gonna come behind LGBTQ people who are people of color, is the same system that came after Muslims, is the same system that's coming after single parents, after people seeking abortion, it's the same system, and we need to change that.
Exactly, and when we talk about allyship, what you were saying, being laptop activists, why is it important that people of power, especially the President of the United States, treat this as a human issue? Why should they protect undocumented individuals? We can start with Ronnie.
I think it also has to do with Christian dominance. Where are your values as elected officials? Where are your values as a man who married an immigrant? Where are your values as someone who inherited your wealth from people who benefited from slavery? Where are your values? What's the point of saying God bless America if your actions say the opposite? I think that is very godless to see someone in power, taking away DACA, and more than just taking DACA away, to from the moment in which that person started campaigning, framing immigrants as rapists, as this and that, when the research actually shows the opposite, right? U.S. citizens crime, U.S. on U.S. citizens crime is like an issue. Domestic terrorism is an issue. So we need to put our actions in alignment with our values, particularly people who identify as religious, particularly people who still believe in some sort of higher power. It's not just prayers for this or for that, it's about actions.
Exactly. And Julia, I saw you were nodding too. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I think framing it's just the violence that is surrounding the rhetoric of immigration is exactly that. It's violence. It's violence meant to, in the president's case, get elected based on people's false fears. Framing it in a human rights issue and humanity. I always frame this to folks who feel like they're on the fence or I'm not political. What would you do? What would you do for your family? Often I sit across the table in awe of my clients' life experiences because I can't even empathize with them. I've never experienced what they have. And the courage to be able to leave everything behind. When we're talking about folks who are seeking basic life safety, we're not talking about someone who's like, I want to go to the United States because there exists this tiny policy that was announced 7 months ago. It's not happening, folks. It's about people leaving certain countries in Central America because they're fearful of their life. I have children telling me stories about being sexually assaulted, 12-year-old, 13-year-old girls and boys walking a block to school because of unchecked gang violence, which happened to start in the United States. So it's also self-reflecting as a nation.
And with the guns from the United States.
And with the guns from the United States. And so, folks, if people really want to look at this national identity, we're a nation of immigrants. If you're not a federally recognized Native American, you're an immigrant in your history, and folks need to reflect on that. And secondly, our immigration system reflects what most people will consider the core basis family. And that's a good thing, right? It's a good thing for some people. So this dialogue of changing the immigration system to merit-based is, again, just another way to oppress people.
Yeah, the whole thing about like the more you produce, the more worthy you are to get relief from deportation. That's just so outdated. It's so wrong. It's just anti the values that this country professes to have.
And it really doesn't reflect, again, history. Why is it that certain nations have such a desperate dichotomy between rich and poor? What are the U.S. policies that have influenced that? What benefits do we take? So I definitely see, when I'm sitting across the table from a 15-year-old young man who identifies as gay, and maybe he can't articulate the fear, but I know what would he be facing if he was deported. I don't see it as a political issue. I see it as a human issue. And the fear is real, but it just motivates folks like myself and Ronnie. I'll speak for you.
Yeah, I mean, like let's remember that family rejection is the #1 factor contributing to homelessness and contributing to increased depression and suicidality. So LGBTQ immigration also too often looks unaccompanied. And it does not have the safety net that heterosexual immigration have. If something goes wrong for you, if you're poor, if you're unemployed, if you don't have DACA, or if you don't go to college and have the support system to fundraise enough to pay for your own tuition, you know what? You have la comadre, you have your dad, you have your mom, you have your siblings. But when you're LGBTQ, many of us are rejected from our own families, so where's the support?
Exactly. And I'd really like to thank both of you for coming today. This meant a lot. And that's all the time we have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before being deported, immigrants may spend time in detention. Since President Trump took office, the average length of detention time has doubled to 51.5 days. LGBTQ immigrants face verbal and physical abuse in these facilities. Justice Department statistics estimate 1 in 5 sexual assault allegations included a transgender victim. Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 5 and on LA 36 at 8:30 Friday mornings. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Jocelyn Castro.